Okay, welcome everybody. We'll just give everyone to log in. Everyone's joining in. If all the panelists can come on video, that would be fantastic. As we wait for everyone to join, welcome everyone to today's webinar on costing tools. We're really excited to have you here. All right, well, we can begin. So welcome everyone today. Just a few housekeeping things. We'll be hearing from very exciting panelists today. As you listen to them, as you have questions come up, if you can add your questions to the Q&A chat. And you can also vote and you can also respond to questions from your peers. And we reserve the chat for introducing yourselves. We'd love to hear, if you in the chat, you can introduce yourself, your name, where you're calling in from, what organization, what's interesting to you. And if you can just make sure you select to everyone instead of just the two hosts and panelists, because attendees can chat with everyone. Because when you chat with just hosts and panelists, only we can see it and we want everyone to see it. So if everyone can just take a second to introduce yourself, your name, where you're calling in from, what brings you here today, that would be fantastic. All right, so it's my pleasure to introduce this webinar to you today. It will be a 90-minute long webinar. And the focus that we want to be able to provide you an overview with the latest tools and resources that have been created to support evidence-based planning and advocacy for increasing investments in ECE services. So we'll be hearing from UNICEF about their ECE accelerator simulation and costing model. We'll be hearing from the ILO on their care policy investment simulator, and as well as Brookings on their childhood cost calculator. But to kick us off and give us a really nice framing, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Yelene Pan, who is a consultant that works with the Strategic Impact Evaluation Fund and the Education Finance Thematic Group at the World Bank. So she specialized in impact evaluation, economic evaluation, decision-making and resource allocations, and Bayesian statistics. So it's a real pleasure to have you, Yelene. So over to you.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Shikofa. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Yelene Pan. I'm working for the Strategic Impact Evaluation Fund at the World Bank. In the next 10 minutes, I'm just going to give you a high-level introduction on why and how to conduct rigorous cost analysis for early childhood development programs. And I'm going to use some examples that my colleague Alaka Holla and I have done in this field to illustrate these ideas. So the first question we'd like to ask is, why should we do costing? Cost analysis can tell us a lot. There are multiple types of cost analysis, and each of them help to answer different policy questions. The first type I would like to mention is what we call cost economy analysis. It basically helps you answer the questions like how much did the program cost, or how much will the program cost, how much will it cost at scale, what are the largest drivers, etc. Basically, it estimates the total cost of the implementation and helps you to estimate, helps you to assess the financial stability. Now we get the total cost. If we divide that by the number of beneficiaries, that could be the number of children, the number of teachers or households served, we get the unit cost per beneficiary. And that's what we call cost efficiency analysis. I want to mention that by efficiency, it only means operational efficiency. That's the unit cost to provide the services. It has nothing to do with the impact or outcomes. The next type of analysis, which you probably have often heard, is cost-benefit analysis. Sometimes it's called analysis on rate of returns or returns on investment analysis. So it compares the cost of providing the intervention or program with the monetary values of the impact of this program, helping us to assess whether the benefits outweigh the cost. So basically help us to answer the questions like, does it worth to do this? The next type is cost-effective analysis. It compares different programs that have the same goal and tell us which one is the least expensive way to achieve a certain impact. The concept cost effectiveness only makes sense when we compare multiple programs that serve the same intervention at similar scales that targeting similar populations. Last but not least, I want to mention that cost analysis really help us to get a deep understanding of the implementation, because we'll need to get information on what specific resources are needed, in what intensity, and for how long. We usually say that if you cannot cost out intervention, it probably means we have not known the implementation, either the actual implementation or the perceived implementation well enough. Now, I'm just going to use an example that Alaka and I have done to show you what kind of information we can get from a cost analysis. This program is called PATIN. It's an ECD home visiting program implemented in the state Ceará, Brazil. So home visitors would visit the low-income families in rural areas regularly and help parents interact with children. We get the chance to collect data from 32 municipalities in this state. So now you see these are the 32 municipalities. And then we estimated the average cost per child per month. And the bar shows how how big it is in terms of the average, the cost per child per month. And as you can see, even though this is the same program, there's a high variation in terms of cost. Some of the program, in some municipality, for example, the most expensive one, it actually costs about 2 times of the least costly municipality. So the next question we may want to ask is, what drives the variation of the cost? Right now, let's decompose these bars into ingredients or resources. The y-axis is still this 32 municipalities. And then we decompose the average cost into the cost of the payment for home visitors, the time of supervisors. The supervisors are the local officials who's in charge of the organization, the monitoring, etc. Transportation costs, the food, training, and the supplies. So each block shows the average cost per child per month of this ingredient for this municipality. And the darker the color is, the higher the cost. So what can we tell from this graph? First of all, for home visitors, as you may say, it's homogeneous. The time cost is the same across municipalities. And for most municipalities, it is a dominating cost. And it's not surprising, as these home visitors are paid by the state government using a transfer. Now let's look at the supervisors. These are local officials. As you see, there's some variations in the cost in the supervisor's time, mainly driven by two factors. One is how much time did they spend on monitoring or organizing this program. The second factor is how much are these supervisors paid from the municipality. So if we do plot these two factors on the x-axis and y-axis, and we do see a large variation. We see that in some of the municipalities, they almost spend 100% of their time, while others spend less than 10%. Some of the supervisors are paid very high by the municipality, some are quite low. So that really helps to us to understand the implementation variation in the field. The same thing for transportation, supplies, etc. I won't be able to, due to the time constraints, I won't be able to go to the details. But even without, I just want to make the point that even without impact information, we can really understand the implementation variation, and this analysis helps the State Department to revise the funding formula. So next, I'm just going to really quick touch base on the methods and how to produce accurate and relevant cost estimates. There are two types of methods: micro costing, also called ingredients method, or ingredients method, or activity-based methods. The idea is you identify the ingredients, enumerate the quantities, the prices, understanding how much time is allocated for personnel and when to allocate them, and increase them and aggregate them into total cost. Another type of analysis model is called simulation model. So we put a lot of efforts in predicting population, enrollment, policy parameters. Sometimes they're unit cost, but sometimes they borrow the benefits of micro costing, and will allow you to specify the prices for teacher salaries, for infrastructure, etc., so that the estimates is more accurate to respond to scale and prices. There's no direct distinction, I would say. You would say some models borrow the benefits of both of them. And in the tools we're going to present, you will see tools that are using one method or both methods. So cost data needs to be accurate and relevant in order to be useful. Both principles I explained in detail in this policy brief called Capturing Cost Data. We're going to share the link of that. So I'm not going to the details of that, but basically the takeaway information is number one, in order to make it accurate, it needs to be disaggregated. It needs to be intervention specific, and use multiple sources of information to cross-validate the data, and different users using different costs. So when you provide cost estimates, make sure that this is the cost estimate that the user are interested in. Last but not least, I'll go to tools, and that's actually the focus of today's webinar. So at SAFE, we developed a series of tools. All of them are Excel-based, interactive, and easy to use. And as you see from the list, it covers different types of topics, and not all of them are ECD specific, but it covers like school reopening, learning recovery, ICT for inclusions, etc. If you are interested in adapting these tools for your context, I'll be happy to talk about that.
Thank you, Yili.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Yili. Maybe wrap up in 1 minute.
Oh yeah, sure. So there, I've just last sentence to pass it back to you. In today's session, we're going to introduce multiple three tools that are focused on ECD, and I'm going to pass it to my colleagues.
Thank you so much, Yilin. That was excellent. Yilin, I encourage you to put in the links in the chat if you can, so everyone can have it. And also just a reminder to panelists to monitor the Q&A for questions you can answer live. All right, well, that was a great overview of what costing tools can do and what use they can have. And let's take some deep dives into it. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Abdullah Alam, who is the costing and financing specialist at UNICEF with the early childhood education team. And he's going to provide an overview of the EC Accelerator simulation and costing model. So over to you, Abdullah. And yes, 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shagufe. So as Yilin mentioned, the purpose is to share with you the EC Accelerator simulation and costing model. And what is that? So it will be a high-level presentation. I'll try to cover as much as I can during these 10 minutes. So, okay.
So Abdullah, do you want to go to the first slide? Because I think you're on the last slide.
Okay. Okay, sorry. Okay, so before I start, let me remind us all of the ultimate medium-term goal, that is the achievement of SDG 4.2 target, especially if you are talking about ECE and ECD. The goal, it requires all children to have access to quality early childhood development, care, and pre-primary education, so that they are prepared for primary education. And this target also has two linked indicators in the form of SDG 4.2.1 and 4.2.2. The way I've structured my presentation, I've divided into four parts. In the first part, I'll highlight the need and the purpose of simulation modeling. I'll then follow it up by presenting some of the key features of the EC Accelerator simulation model and explaining how it works. And then I'll provide a brief overview of the user guide that accompanies the model. And lastly, I'll share an update on what has been done so far on the simulation model and what are our plans for the future. Okay, so why simulation models are needed? So the purpose of simulation, of using these simulation models, they can be many in general. However, for our purposes, there are four key reasons for using such simulation models. Firstly, these models, they help us in setting the policy priorities based on the evidence that is in front of us in the form of education sector analysis and supporting projections that are done using such kind of simulation models. Secondly, they help us test the impact of various policy options, especially if we look at from the perspective of feasibility, scalability, and sustainability. These simulation models, they also allow us to go back and forth and adjust our priorities, strategies, activities, targets, and costs that need to be included while undertaking the education sector planning. Last but not the least, they are also useful in assessing the financial feasibility of our set priorities and the expected impact of our envisaged policies. So how these simulation models, they look in real life situations. So these simulation models, they can be applied in and they are also useful in a variety of situations. For example, Kyrgyzstan, it was exploring provision of school meals and using a mix of public provision and parental contributions for the purpose. So the simulation model, it can help us in knowing what the impact of such a policy will be and how it will be reflected in the form of finances. And then similarly, we advocate for a progressive allocation of 10% of education budgets for EC. So, and we're also aware that the current state of EC financing is way below this benchmark. So the simulation models, they can help us in knowing what it would take to achieve this 10% benchmark, and if that is achievable in the short term or medium term or the long term. And also, as an example, for SDG 4.2, it requires achievement of at least 1 year of pre-primary education by 2030 for all countries. So the simulation models, they can help us in knowing the human resources required, the infrastructural resources required, and the financial resources required for achieving this target. Moving on to the simulation model, just to provide you a glance of what the simulation model is. So the purpose of the model, it is of course to estimate the resources that are required for achieving SDG 4.2 targets. It covers currently it covers years from 2021 till 2030, but of course it can be adjusted to cover any 10 years time period, and it incorporates pre-primary education for children that are aged 3 to 5 years. It is applicable at the national level, and it can also be used at the sub-national level as well. It has been developed using MS Excel, as it is a widely available and easy to use tool. And the model, it has several key features, some of which I'll mention. It shows yearly projections over the years, especially for enrollment and the resources, the human resources, infrastructural resources, and the financial resources. It also highlights contributions of various education providers, and it includes special needs education as well. It also covers major infrastructural needs of the system, and it also allows for including various education strategies along with the traditional modeling. So for the model to work, it requires several data points that are related to population, enrollment, infrastructure, and human resource. And then policy decisions are made and reflected in the model that are in line with the discussions and agreement between the planners, stakeholders, and policymakers. And it also includes a semantic sheet, which allows for renaming various items and categories within the tool. In terms of outputs, the model, it presents projections for enrollment, net enrollment rates, human resource, infrastructure, and financial resources that are required for the next upcoming 10 years. It also presents various scenarios that allow for better planning and financing of EC service delivery through evidence-based decision making. Moving on, some of the key features of the model, it allows generating possible scenarios using available data on key education indicators. It is a living tool that can be used to test the impact of various policy options and allow adjustments in parameters to reflect policy options or target EC subsector. And then it also allows having an overview of EC costs, financing gaps, HR, and infrastructure, etc., that I have mentioned. And moving on, just a quick guide in terms of how to use the model. So I've just outlined 6 steps. It requires availability of data, and then the data trends are also indicated into the model. Policy options are outlined in the model, and then it allows you to see the resources that are required. It also requires you to input the unit rates into the model and then analyze the financial requirements of using the model. So this is again a quick overview of how it works. It takes projections for population and enrollment, and based on that, it calculates the salary cost, non-salary cost, and the capital expenditure that is required. And then the model, it can always, because it is a living tool, it can always be adjusted to include more data, changing the policy options just to see what is the impact of such policies. And quickly glancing over the user guide. So the tool comes with a user guide. All the steps for using the model have been outlined in the user guide, and it not only allows you to see the steps for using the simulation process, but it also provides basic key explanations of the key terms that are used in the model. Moving on, the last slide slide of my presentation. So what has been done so far, we have developed the simulation model. It has been piloted in 7 countries across different regions. We are still awaiting results from the countries so that we can tailor our model accordingly. And we have also undertaken capacity building of stakeholders. And these stakeholders include government officials and development partners. So what's next is that based on the country feedback that we receive, we'll tailor the model and we'll keep on improving the model. And then along the way, we'll also start enhancing the capacity of partners to use the accelerator model. And down the line, we also plan to include emergency education in emergencies. We plan to adapt our model to education in emergencies also. Finally, if you want to explore the model, you want to use the model, this is the link that is on the slide. The slideshow will be shared with all the participants. You can just click the link and download the Excel file and the user guide along with it. And my email address is also located down there if you want any guidance, etc. So we will be happy to provide that one. Thank you so much for listening. Over to Isha.
Thank you so much, Abdullah. Abdullah, I encourage you, Joa, others on the call, if you can pop that link in the chat for people to access. Again, same with all the other panelists, if you can have your resource links ready to put it in the chat. Speaking of the chat, I just want to comment on the incredible diversity of people joining this call, from frontline ECD teachers to ministries to, multilateral donors. I mean, it's incredible, the variety of everyone we have on here. Again, a reminder to please put in your questions in the Q&A. We'll have a live panel discussion after the panelists, but also our panelists are writing away very in-depth answers as well that you can look at in the Q&A. With that said, thank you again, Abdullah. And now it's my pleasure to introduce you to Laura Adati, who is the Care Policy Specialist of the Gender Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Branch, Conditions of Work and Equality Department of the International Labour Organization, or the ILO. And Laura today will be presenting to us on the ILO Care Policy Investment Simulator. So over to you, Laura.
Thank you so much, Shakupe, and to all my co-panelists. It's really a pleasure to be here and present the forthcoming online ILO Care Policy Investment Simulator. It aims at supporting countries to close care policy gaps, so it builds on existing legal and implementation gaps through investment in country-specific, gender transformative care policy packages, including ECD programs. My presentation will focus on why we built this new tool with the financial support of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. What are the key features and the results you can get from this simulator, in particular concerning ECD services, and how you can use this result. So why a new tool, a new simulator? Last March, the ILO published a global report, Care at Work, which shows that over the past decades, there have been some progress made in national legislation concerning care policies, in particular, better maternity, paternity leave, in line with the provision of international labor standards. Also, for the first time, we surveyed national legislation on childcare and long-term care services. Despite this progress, we show that there are persisting and significant legal gaps. In particular, if we look at childcare services, only 21 countries mandate a universal right to childcare services, and over 181 countries are without statutory and publicly organized early childhood education development programs for 0 to 2 years old. Also, when we look at how leave policies integrate with childcare services, we found a large global care policy gap, which is the time frame, the time lag between the end of leave entitlements and the age at which children are entitled to early childhood education or primary school, mandatory primary school, where these services are not available. We find that on average, this time lag is over 4 years, which means that almost 2 billion parents around the world, potential parents, live in countries where there is, for this very long time, a lack of any childcare support in the form of leave or childcare services. Also, we find that there is a persistent underestimation of the work of childcare educators. When we compare the salary of childcare preschool teachers compared to the primary school teacher, we see that there is a gap due to the low value that is paid to this workforce, which is over feminized, that is registered low levels of unionization, is affected by dire working conditions, and especially after the pandemic, this childcare and education workforce has been brought really at a breaking point. So we really need, there is a need for integrated policy packages that include a combination of time, income protection services, and that are rights-based, so that include high quality, universal childcare services that are gender transformative, that are based on collective mechanisms that make them free or affordable, staffed by high quality care jobs, and that are grounded on the representation of workers and social dialogue. To do so, to support countries to fill those care gaps, the ILO ran a macro simulation for 82 countries that shows that there is an important employment generation case for investing in integrated care policy packages. We estimate that investing in these packages will generate by 2030 280 million jobs, of which 96 million would be direct jobs in childcare, that it will take almost 1.5% of GDP to provide this high quality childcare services over and above the current public spending of 0.3% of GDP. The majority of these jobs will go to women, they will be formal, so there is a high potential of gender transformation, and also there is a high return on investment for each dollar spent on childcare services in terms of GDP increase. So how so we translated this simulator into this, based on this macro model. We built an online tool that basically allows countries, users to build their own country simulation based on one of the 82 countries. So all this data are available for these countries. They will be able to choose one of these policies for 2 years. And run this simulation, getting results on Excel and comparing results across countries and across policies. So the simulator consists of 2 parts. The first part, based on a selection of one or multiple countries, the user can set their own policy parameters, and I can show you a preview for childcare policies. You can see on the right side that the user can select, for instance, the percentage of children that will be covered under the 2 programs, the hours per week spent in childcare services, the child to teacher ratio, the pay level, so some quality related parameters that can be set, and then the results can be run, obtaining, as you can see, the personal, like the tailor-made scenario including the gross investment required. And we talk about investment because of the benefits that we expect this investment, this spending will generate. What a detail of what type of jobs in childcare will be generated, and also the impact in terms of changes in employment, rates of women, reduction of earning gaps between women and men, and also the return of investment resulting for better maternal employment and earnings. So these the advantage of the tool is that all the data are available. The user will online, they are built into the tool. The user will just have to set their policy scenario. So just to conclude, the simulator is a powerful advocacy tool to help governments and other stakeholders to place this topic high in the national agenda, to push for concrete action based not only on the investment requirements, but also on the expected benefits. And thanks to this particular feature, we have used already the results of this macro simulation in partnership with the International Trade Union Confederation, the European Commission, other partners, to basically build the case for investment. We're also preparing a training academy with our International Training Center, where we expect also gaining user more access. We've used those data in some regional companion reports that we plan to publish later this year, and finally also for policy dialogue. So to conclude, stay tuned for the launch of the simulator as part of a global care policy portal at the end of the year, and we remain available for any technical support in the meantime. Thank you so much, and over to you, Shakti.
Thank you, Laura. That was excellent. So I feel like we went from very specific tool for the early childhood education sector to a more macro tool with the ILO. And now, just before I introduce you to our next speaker, I just want to say a lot of questions coming in about webinar recordings and access to the PowerPoints. All of that will be sent to everyone who's registered. And yes, please do share widely with your colleagues, no problem at all. Again, a reminder to put your questions in the Q&A chat. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Emily Gustafson-Wright, who's a senior fellow for global economy and development at the Brookings Institute. She's a senior fellow at the Center for Universal Education at the Brookings Institution, where she has been a scholar since 2006. And in her presentation today, we're going to get an overview of the childhood cost calculator. So over to you, Emily.
Thank you, Shekufe. And thanks to all of you and the rest of my panelists. It's really a pleasure to be here with all of you today and hearing about all of these different tools. And thanks so much to Elian for giving us really a nice overview to help us think about, about costing and why it's important and the different types of cost analysis. So I'm going to, as Shekufe mentioned, I'm going to dive into a cost calculator that we developed at Brookings. And first, just a little bit of background. So we started thinking about costing ECD in about 2014, really because we observed that there was really a paucity of data around the costs of different types of ECD interventions. And so we developed a multi-agency working group on costing ECD, and came out with a number of publications. And those can all be found on our website. And perhaps my colleague, Sarah Osborne, who has been working with me on costing, can put that into the chat, that link to our costing work. In addition to this, we have a forthcoming piece in the Lancet looking at the next 1,000 days on costing. And in that, we also developed a simulation model in which we estimated the costs for universal pre-primary pre-primary education under different types of scenarios. So much like Laura was talking about, the different types of scenarios that you might have, different types of assumptions. And so that will be a forthcoming publication. So that's kind of a big picture, much as my two previous colleagues talked about the simulation. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about a microcosting model that we developed. So first of all, just to start, we really observed there seemed to be a number of barriers around costing. Why were quality costing exercises not happening? Why do we not have good data on costing? Clearly, there's an interest. We have nearly 180 something people on this call. We've had previous webinars on costing. There really is a lot of interest. Everybody recognizes that this is a really important thing to do, yet we're still suffering from this challenge of not having really good quality and consistent cost data. And some of those, just to identify a few of what we have identified as the constraints on the supply side, just insufficient underlying data, poor availability or access to tools to collect and analyze data. There are a lot of methodological complexities to doing costing. And then on the demand side, perhaps just a low prioritization of this, some aversion to transparency, perhaps, and then heterogeneity in terms of capacity and needs. And so in response to this, back in 2014, 2015, we decided to develop our own costing tool, which we named the Standardized ECD Costing Tool, or SECT. And this was an Excel-based tool in which had multiple tabs and different types of functionalities like currency conversion, PPP conversions, amortization, et cetera. And it produced a set of data that included the cost per child or cost per beneficiary, plus breakdowns across different types of items or activities. So we piloted that actually in partnership with the Strategic Impact Evaluation Fund at the World Bank, since we don't have, at Brookings, we don't have direct presence or programming on the ground. We piloted in 5 different countries across a variety of different types of ECD interventions. We learned a lot in that process. And I always say, if I knew how challenging this would be, I might not have gone down this path, but very happy that we did. And we certainly learned a lot. And those who we were working with really, I think, benefited a lot. And we're very grateful for this opportunity to participate in these costing pilots. As a result of the learnings from that, we really understood that there was working in this Excel version of the tool really presented some challenges. And we decided that we needed to develop a more sort of user-friendly tool that could be used in many different contexts and by many different types of users. And so we developed together with RTI, which has the Tangerine platform, which is used for example, assessments like EGRA and EGMA. Some people might be familiar with that. And we thought, well, let's take something that already exists. Let's not reinvent the wheel. Can we build this tool on an existing platform that many individuals are familiar with already? And so that's what we did together with RTI. And as with the previous version of the tool, this could be used across ECD sectors, and including integrated programs, but we also expanded it to include primary and secondary education because we really heard the sort of the demand more broad, for more broadly than just early childhood. This tool also has the built-in functionalities, the currency conversion, amortization, et cetera, as the previous tool did. And it also builds a database of education and ECD costs, which I'll talk about. And this tool is really meant to be used by anybody, by policymakers, by funders, by implementers, and by researchers. So what types of questions can the tool be used to answer? So going back to what Yilin was talking at the beginning, so this is a micro costing. So you'll see here some of the terms that she used. We have cost efficiency, cost economy, cost feasibility, what resources are needed to deliver an intervention. What are the cost implications of a programmatic change, such as in dosage? How do you compare the cost of one intervention versus another intervention? What are the key cost drivers? So these are sort of the types of questions, and you will all receive these slides after, so you can look at this in more detail. It can also contribute, but not directly answer some of these other questions around cost efficiency, cost effectiveness, cost benefit analysis. So the cost data can be used together with other types of data to answer these questions. So this is, as I mentioned, it's based in Tangerine. It has each of the cost categories has its own form. So it's entered, the data are entered in this survey form. It's a survey platform, and it walks the user through with guidance along the way, like these pop-up boxes. And it also has an accompanying user guide. So this is just an illustrated example of what it looks like. And it can be used across different sectors and interventions, as I mentioned, all of these things. And these are really used as tags so that we can distinguish between the different costs in the cost database. It's broken up into two big cost categories: overhead costs and direct costs, each of which have these subcategories within them. It's also built such that it breaks it down by different resource types, as you can see here. And then an additional cost classification, two additional cost classifications: investment versus recurrent costs, and imputed or donated versus costs that are directly paid for. It also spits out these automatic data visualizations. This is again just illustrative, but that can be used also to better understand the data. And as I mentioned, a result of this will be a searchable database. So an interactive database where you can search for different costs for different types of interventions by selecting by region or by country programs. This is just a model. We actually took this from the IDELA website, which we thought we really liked, and so this is what we shared with our developers and said this is what we want it to look like. And so that will be also coming soon. And this is all housed on a website, the cost calculator and the database. And that includes also the guidance tool. We are currently piloting the calculator in 3 different countries, and really looking forward to the results of that. And if you would like to learn more, here feel free to email me. We also have a costing email address, childhoodcostdata@brookings.edu, and happy to answer any questions. Thanks, Rikufe.
Thanks, Emily. Excellent. All right, so I'm going to quickly do a brief presentation to kind of do an overview of what we've all seen. So, and then we'll go into the panel discussion. So we've heard from 3 different types of costing tools, and sometimes it's good to just repeat and see them side by side. So really quickly, we'll just do a brief overview of the 3 different tools once again to refresh our memories while we go into the panel discussion. So again, encouraging everyone to type in your questions in the Q&A, and we'll be selecting some to answer live. So Brookings childhood costing tool, what is the purpose of the 3 different tools? For the Brookings costing, the child cost calculator, it's to facilitate costing of past, current, or future programs to determine costs per beneficiary and the total of the whole program, compare costs between initiatives, and understand the cost distribution and the cost of scaling. On the other hand, the ILO Care Policy Investment Simulator, it's to present how to close the care policy gap. So it's much more of a macro tool through investment in country-specific gender transformative care policy packages, and assess the multiple benefits of investing in the care economy. And the UNICEF ECE Accelerator tool that we saw, that one is to develop scenarios for very specifically better planning and financing of early childhood education services, service delivery through evidence-based decision-making, and exploring their relative feasibility, scalability, and sustainability. So the Brookings Childhood Cost Calculator, where would you focus? Essentially all intervention areas with a focus on children, including education, health, nutrition, social protection, water and sanitation, and governance. For the ILO care policy, it looks at policies like parental leave, breastfeeding breaks, childcare and long-term care services, quality care jobs, and the EC Accelerator simulation model, again, very specifically on the early childhood education. Users, all three tools are very broad. It's meant for researchers, implementation program staff, governments, donors, everyone. So that's something common across the three tools. All right. All right. In terms of the costing method, as we repeatedly heard, the childhood cost calculator does micro costing or ingredients-based costing, and that's the same with the ECE Accelerator tool. However, the ILO Care Policy Investment Simulator is a macro simulation based on the input-output and the social accounting matrix data, or the SAM data, with over 180 variables that are embedded in the tool. And the ECE Accelerator is both micro costing and simulation. In terms of the types of analysis for the childhood cost calculator, it's both retrospective and prospective, but the care policy and the EC Accelerator are both prospective. What are each of the tools used for? The Brookings Childhood Cost Calculator is used for cost economy and cost efficiency analysis, planning, budgeting, scaling, and as Emily mentioned, it can also inform cost effective and cost benefit analysis depending on availability of additional data. For the Care Policy Investment Simulator, it's a cost benefit analysis for planning, budgeting, and policy and legal reforms. Again, much more at the macro scale. And EC Accelerator, it's for planning, costing, and policy analysis, especially for the education sector planning. Now, the next slide, I'm not going to go into this, but the slide I've kept it here so that when you do get the presentations, you have it in detail in terms of how to use the tool. All of them are accessible online. The EC Accelerator, as Abdullah mentioned, is more Excel-based, and the tool automatically populates with pre-added formula, and you get to input based on how many years and the type of data that you do have, and various costing scenarios and models are there. For the care policy investment tool, again, there are 4 care policies, and you choose the projection year, and the tool itself guides you in with a tutorial video and an online tool on how to use it. And the childhood cost calculator tool, again, you select from a set of sectors and intervention types and enter the data that you have. Again, all of it is guided with pre-populated formula and generates results according to what data you have available. In terms of how they can be repurposed, they can all be customized based on the country context and program design as well. All right. With that brief kind of putting all 3 on one page, and of course we know that there aren't only 3 tools, that there are many, many more tools. And so because of the complexity of the costing landscape and the importance of costing, I just wanted to share with everyone about the Global ECD and Education Costing Consortium, or the GEEC, it was launched about 2-3 years ago. It's co-hosted by ECDAN and the Brookings Institute, and we invite everyone to join it, because what we think it's really critical to make sense of costing data and make sure that policymakers and practitioners especially have a common language around it and understand it, learn from other people's experience, so a peer learning space for that, and work on building capacity and awareness about the importance of costing data. So with that, what is the core problem that the GEEC or the consortium is trying to solve? This is our problem statement. Governments, funders, and implementers often do not have adequate cost data to use in financial planning, budgeting, and priority setting, which can lead to insufficient and suboptimal allocation and spending of resources for education and early childhood development programming. So that's what we are trying to tackle together, and this webinar is, one of the first steps in that effort. This is our theory of change. I won't go through all of it, but essentially our primary outcomes, we want to improve allocation of donor and domestic funding. We want to improve selection of design and management of programs and improve accuracy and efficiency of value for money. So we're working on a costing tool repository, a landscape analysis of tools, practical use guidance, essentially a way to make sense of the costing landscape. All right, with that, it is my pleasure to start our panel discussion. So I'll just invite all of our panelists to come on video and we can begin. And so while I ask a couple questions to you, again, encouraging everyone to write their questions in the Q&A. All right, so let's begin. So costing tools, as we've seen, can be very, very technical to use. And this is one of the reasons that stakeholders are not able to benefit from them. So I'm just very curious to some of you who have these tools, what types of technical support does each of the tools provide? If you could provide like a 1-minute, very brief answer, that would be great. So I'm just curious, Brookings, UNICEF, if you have any input into this. Go ahead, Abdullah.
Thank you, Shagufta. So I'll start with it. So with the EC Accelerated Toolkit, we have a dedicated guide along with the model. It outlines all the detailed steps. So if you have that Excel tool and you have that guide, so you can see all the steps from the guide, and then you can just simulate that process on the Excel tool. So that guide is quite comprehensive. We are also working with the country offices, the UNICEF country offices, for developing their capacities for using this model. And we have also worked with government officials in a number of countries to build their capacity on using the model. And lastly, we have also tried to make the tool as easy as it can be. So it just requires inputs. So there is an input sheet in which you need to enter all the data, and everything else is taken care of by the model in terms of the dashboard and the resource calculation, etc., etc. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
I can
Emily,
jump in.
over to you.
Yeah,
and I
please,
also
please.
want to add, in the Q&A, there's also a question about whether the tool is free or not. So if you can also respond to
Sure.
that.
Absolutely. So as I mentioned, the tool, and like Abdullah said, we really were aiming to develop a tool that was as user-friendly as possible. So that's sort of the first piece. And as I mentioned, within the cost calculator, there are a number, there's quite a bit of guidance, for the user as they're going along. And we have a user guide that's available as part of it. In our current pilots, we are working closely with our pilot partners in Cambodia, Ghana, and Honduras. And in that process, we've also developed sort of a costing lab model where we're working closely with the partners, really being, providing support on the side alongside this costing exercise as it's happening, and thinking a lot about bringing other stakeholders into a broader conversation. I also wanted to mention that yes, the tool will be available for free on the website, and we will the idea is to translate the tool and the guidance documents into a number of other languages. Currently, it's only available in English, but we are working to doing translation.
And yes, I believe all 3 tools are free. I know UNICEF and Brookings and ILO, yes?
Yes. Also, our
Great.
tool will be free, available in English, French, and Spanish online. The tool will be accompanied by a tutorial video just for a fast start. Also, it's conceived to be user-friendly with a lot of guidance on the definitions, very technical subjects. So we really want to accompany the users, and the fact that, as I mentioned, the data are built into the tool really require for the user just to navigate, learn how to navigate, access, build the policy parameters, and get the results that are, can be extracted via Excel.
Thank you. Just quickly to the next question. The costing models are generally data dependent, and in many cases, this is a big problem that countries do not have extensive and robust data on ECE, or just robust data on the childcare policies, for example, or the interventions, Emily, that you talked about. So what should those countries do? And is there a way for these countries to benefit from any of these tools when you don't have access to the data? Requesting very brief responses. Yelin, I'll go over to you to see if you have a quick response to that.
Oh, sure. The first cost analysis I have ever done at the World Bank is in the context of Afghanistan. So that's FCV context, that's a data scarce context. But even though we were able to collect data from multiple implementations agencies, including local NGOs, and we'll be able to do some cross-validation to dramatically increase the accuracy of the data. So that gives me a lot of confidence that even in data scarce environments, we'll be able to do something to get to know from cost data. There are ways to improve the data availability. For example, through piloting, we get to know who is the best people to provide certain data, and for some, and also how to estimate data when the real data are not available. Another thing I have been doing is I review literature to set up default values for the policymakers in order to reduce the burden on data input. So I'll stop here, and I will I'm hoping other panelists could share their experiences.
Thanks, Yelin. Does anyone else have anything to add to that briefly?
Shakufe, I'll do that very quickly.
Briefly.
So for yeah, I'll do that. So for our model, so it requires a lot of data, yes, I would say, but we have divided that into essential data and non-essential data. So with the basic data like enrollment teachers that should be available in a country context, you should be able to run the model. But if you have more data, your model can be very robust. So that essential data is needed, but otherwise the model can work with basic data as well. I'll stop it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Abdullah. That was excellent. Another question is, can cost estimates generated from one context in say like Brazil be generalized to another context? To the panelists. Laura, I'm curious, or Emily, go ahead.
Oh, I'm happy to jump in. No, I think it's really important to, this is a really important point, and Yelin really presented that obviously in her presentation. And, there are, if our tool can be, made as specific as possible per the context or the population being served. Obviously, there's huge variation, not only by the context, but who is being served by this intervention. I think that's really important. And I think that's also important to take into consideration when you're looking at these simulation models that are sort of big picture, to remember that within those, there might be and is likely a great deal of variation, within a country or even within a state, or, and across municipalities. So I think that's a really important point.
Thanks, Emily. Laura, go ahead.
Yes, we learned a lot by the data compilation for the 82 countries. So we are pushing ourselves to try to apply the model for countries that are missing, in particular North Africa and the Middle East. And I see that the participant mentioned Lebanon, one of the countries where we are trying to apply the model, even where we are missing input-output of SAM data. Just to underline the advantage that we have a large ILO macro data set that is compiled and harmonized by our statistics department. We invite you to check ILO stat with multiple employment, wages data. So this is our source that allows us really to try to apply the model. So even when we don't have the full spectrum of data, we can try to expand and apply the model to other data in collaboration also with our country offices.
Thank you, Laura. So we'll jump now, panelists, to questions from the attendees, and I've allowed a few of you to speak. So I'll go first to Richard Chivaka. Richard, do you want to just briefly introduce yourself, let us know where you're calling in from, and ask your question live very briefly?
Thank you very much. So I'm calling from South Africa, work with Spark Youth Africa. Thank you so much for the costing models. Now, I've been chatting with Eileen and she has responded a little bit to my questions. My question, it revolves around volatility in the environments within which we work. So you guys have addressed lack of data, which you can handle, but volatility is another issue. So how do you deal with volatility when it comes to coming up with assumptions that hold water in the context of these simulation models? Thanks.
Thanks, Richard. Really important and excellent question. Who would like to tackle that? Yelin, do you want to quickly share what you've been sharing and then maybe others can chime in?
Oh, sure. So these are, well, definitely it's very important to test what assumptions are reasonable. And here, some of the methods I have used. One is to use past trend to inform future trends, like the parameters on annual enrollment rate. The second thing, the way I usually do is to elicit the best guesses from stakeholders, from policymakers. Third way would be to use a public expenditure per pupil as a benchmark. For example, I used to have an analysis showing that the cost of a teacher professional training program costs as much as 20% of the current public expenditure on ECD. By saying that, you immediately know that it's probably not feasible, definitely not feasible to implement that, and you have to go back to your parameters to see whether they are reasonable or not. And the fourth would be to conduct sensitivity analysis to get an idea on the best and worst scenarios, give policymakers to help policymakers to understand the uncertainties, even though there's assumptions you used kind of predict unpredictable in a lot of scenarios. I'll stop here and I will invite other panelists to share their insights and their experiences.
Thanks, Yelin. That was really comprehensive. Does anyone have anything to add to Yelin before we move on to the next question? I think that was quite comprehensive. So one of the questions that I see here is, oh, you guys the panelists are so fast. They answer the questions online really, really quickly. So one question was, do the tools include the cost of shadow providers, basically substitute teacher caregivers, and whether this cost changes with changes in provider remuneration? So I think, Emily, you said that your cost tool is a yes, that you can do that. But I'm wondering about Abdullah, does the UNICEF cost tool allow for that as well?
Yeah, so the UNICEF tool also allows for that, and we have separate categories where you can even enter any other categories that are apart from the currently existing categories. So it also provides for that, yes.
Okay, really fantastic. I'm going to invite Fabiola Garcera Arango. If you can just unmute yourself, ask your question, share where you're calling in from very briefly. Fabiola?
Buen día. No speak in English, and so
I'll translate for you,
Spanish.
Fabiola. Entonces puedes hablar en español.
Gracias. Mi pregunta va dirigida a cómo hacemos
Fabiola, Fabiola,
Sí.
¿puedes decir de dónde estás llamando?
Sí, Colombia, de Colombia.
Okay, Fabiola's calling in from Colombia.
Gracias.
Sigue. Ujú.
Bueno, mi pregunta va dirigida a cómo garantizar que estos datos tan importantes lleguen a los gobiernos locales, no a los gobiernos nacionales solamente. Porque, por ejemplo...
Fabiola, perdón, voy a traducir.
Sí.
Fabiola is asking, how do we ensure that this really critical data reaches local governments and not just now national governments? Because, sigue Fabiola?
En Latinoamérica, los gobiernos locales toman decisiones sobre inversión en primera infancia y en infancia. Entonces, esto les serviría mucho a estos gobernantes.
Because in Latin America, it's the local governments that make investment decisions for early childhood, and this would be really important for them. Gracias, Fabiola. Okay, over to you, panelists.
So, Shakuba, I'll start it, then other colleagues can also chime in. So for the EC accelerator tool model, it can work at the national level and even at the sub-national level. So if local councils are responsible for planning and resource allocation, so this model works perfectly for that, for those conditions as well. I'll stop it. Thank you.
I can respond
Yeah.
also. I'll start in Spanish and then I'll say in English. La herramienta de Brookings también, o sea, se podría usar para cualquier nivel o sea, desde nacional hasta subnacional. O sea, lo importante es tener los datos relevantes para cada nivel. So the Brookings cost calculator can be used for any level. I think just the most important thing is that you need to have that subnational data, right? So you need to be able to access it so that you can use it for the cost calculations. I think it's a really important point. Es un punto súper importante de que se necesita los datos desagregados. You really need to have the disaggregated data to be able to do those types of analysis. And so that, yeah, more specific, tailored interventions and can be done.
Thanks, Emily. Anybody else? Laura, you unmuted? Go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, the point is also building alliances, also to even when the data are not available with this level of disaggregation, but making sure that municipalities, local governments are also part of this movement at the national level to build this investment case, so to mobilize along with feminist movements, child advocates, but also trade unions, employers and workers organization, the private sector, really to push for these investments. Entonces es muy importante crear las alianzas, aunque estos datos no sean disponibles con este nivel de desagregación, para impulsar la inversión en los cuidados en trabajos decentes y servicios de calidad que van juntos en las agendas nacionales y locales. Y necesitamos claramente los gobiernos locales como aliados de estas alianzas. Gracias.
Perfecto. I love this bilingual panel as well. Excellent. Thank you. So I'm going to ask now Masifiso Chetane, if you can unmute yourself, introduce yourself, and ask your question live. Masifiso, are you with us? Okay, while I wait for them to respond, there's a really good question from Matthew Townshend online that asked, how does moving from the Excel-based tool to the online improve the usability and or functionality of the costing tools? Are there key drawbacks to moving to an online tool, especially since, Abdullah, you are choosing to stay with an Excel-based tool, but then Emily, your Brookings has made the decision to transition from an Excel-based tool. So it might be just good to just briefly touch on that question as well. It would be great to hear from you.
Sure, yeah. So, when we first developed this, it seemed like it made sense to develop it in Excel, and that has a lot of benefits in that you can sort of see, you can see all of the data there in front of you. The challenge of that is that it's also a little bit overwhelming, and you have all of this there and you're trying to make sense of it. And so what we did with the online tool was really sort of put that into the background. The data you can also extract the data that you have inputted into a CSV file or an Excel that can be used in Excel. So that is available, but it's not sort of what the user, it's not part of the user interface, so that it's not so overwhelming for the user. So, I think that within Excel, you can do perhaps some direct manipulations with the data and adjustments, kind of like maybe it's quicker to see it like, using the Excel file rather than in the tool where you kind of go back and then it changes it. You have to, there's like another step. But yeah, so I think it also, I answered in the chat, I answered that it also depends a little bit on the program and how the data are organized to begin with. And so kind of what's your starting point? Where are you coming from in terms of how you have the data? So
Thanks, Emily. Abdullah, did you want to come in? Or Yilin, please come in.
Oh, yeah,
Yilin,
sorry,
go.
I just want to add two more factors to consider when choosing between Excel or online based. One is data confidentiality. If it is online, the data will be hosted by the developer most of the time. And because this is kind of budgeting, financing data, some users may have concerns on the data confidentiality. Instead, on Excel, it is based on your desktop, and that's probably won't be a big concern anymore. The second factor would be connectivity or the digital literacy of the users. Folks, we choose to use Excel based because it's a little bit easier to tutor users to do that. And for example, in some cases, we even have to transfer Excel based questions into paper based, so that it could be distributed at a school level when internet is not widely available. I would say the third factor would be the needs for customization. For Excel-based, it's easier to do customization based on your question, based on your availability of data. But for online version, it is one version for everybody. It's less likely to be able to customize. Well, I mean, Emily has some. I'll invite Emily to comment.
So Abdullah, and then maybe, or Emily, did you want to come in quickly on that?
I just wanted to mention that it is, even though it is online, it's not all fixed, because you still select the cost categories and the research types and everything based on your program. So it's not restricted in that way. I just wanted to mention that. Also, I want to mention that we have, just as far as security, I think that's a really important point in terms of where data are housed, et cetera. For our cost calculator, it's a secured server, et cetera. And then the data are, as I mentioned, can be downloaded directly in the CSV file to the individual's computer, so that they have their own access to it. So, yeah.
Thank you. Abdullah, did you have something, or very briefly?
Yeah, very quickly. So Yilin mentioned all the points. So just so our tool is on Excel because we want a lot of countries, basically all the countries, to contextualize it for their purposes. So Excel allows for that easy contextualization even without contacting us. So for an online tool, it might be difficult. That is one of the reasons, apart from the security and the other things that Yilin mentioned, so contextualization, and so that the countries can adapt to their own needs as well, and so they can see whatever is happening in there.
Thanks, Abdullah. In the last few minutes, I want us to zoom out a little bit. I feel like we've done a lot of, responding specifically to the tools. And I think just there are a few questions about which costing tools should we use. There is a very detailed question in the chat right now in the Q&A about what are the short lists of the most basic variables and the types of the most critical costs. So I think the principle here is, how do we navigate? And there was questions about, do we use the costing tools simultaneously or separately? Which ones do we use for what purpose? So I'm just wondering if, we can just zoom out a little bit and have some reflections on how do we solve this complexity of what costing tools to use when, what variables to use when, and so on and so forth. Just any reflections a little bit on that, more as experts who are sort of trying to make costing more accessible to everybody. I've silenced Laura. Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead, Laura.
Yeah, just as you mentioned, Shakoupe, in your excellent wrapping up, the ILO tool has the advantage to be a macro level simulator. So it can be a starting point, as we mentioned, to allocate, place these issues in the agenda by presenting, the investment requirements and the benefits. So it's really to win the buy-in and to situate also the investment in ECD programs as part of more comprehensive intervention. It's not obligatory, but the message that we are sending is that children and their parents really need this integrated package of intervention from, from the very moment women decide to, put a child into life, so that they need this assistance with, these care policies, and when the child is born, time for taking care of the child, sharing between mother and fathers, and then when, according to the condition, the situation, having the option to access high quality care services. So this, as we know, the contexts are very different. There might be resistance, on at what would be the most appropriate age that a child starts, non-familiar care provision, education, etc. So this tool offers the option to adjust to different cultural contexts, remind the user about the international labor standards, about the importance of the quality of jobs and services. So that's the level we want to tackle. And maybe going more at the micro level, I guess maybe the other tool offered that level of detail that has really building the, maybe using national data, more accurate, specific cost elements, building something more specific.
Thanks, Laura. And Emily, I'd love to hear from you, because I know with the Geek initiative, I think this is like one of the things you're trying to do. And so it would be great to hear from you as well before I go to the last question and close out the panel. Go ahead, Emily.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good question. And I think that, like, to some extent, a part of what we're trying to do in Geek is really, and this kind of also responds to the question from Richard Chivaka, which is that we're trying to create a movement about costing. And, this is important for so many reasons. It's important for the advocacy piece. It's important for budgeting and planning, for making really hard decisions with limited budgets. And, and then the sort of more, as Yelin mentioned, the implementation part and the details, getting it right in terms of the quality and ensuring that the outcomes that we want to see achieved are achieved. And so, I think we're all working hard to solve this bigger picture problem. And I really think that these different tools solve different pieces of that, as do these different types of, initiatives like Geek. And so, I think, kind of getting clear, I think, so the way that we're working with our costing pilot partners is really to start off with the question of, kind of what are the problems we're trying to solve? What are our goals? Where like, what's the theory of change in our context, and then think about, which of these tools may be supportive, perhaps at different stages of the process. So, the advocacy piece, if you don't have the money, then it doesn't make sense to do a micro costing exercise if nobody was going to pay for it, right? And so that's a really important piece. So, I think at different stages and in different contexts, these different tools really help to support those gaps.
And Emily, if people wanted to join Geek and join the costing movement, how could they do that? Is there an email address they could email to sign up for Geek? Or I know you had mentioned the costing email for Brookings as well.
We do our cost, and maybe Sarah can put that into the chat also. Yeah, the email address, feel free to email me directly, or to our cost email directly at Brookings. We would love to have you join. We're a bunch of geeks who really care about costing and want to really, sort of spread this movement, because we really believe that it's a critical part to achieving, again, the outcomes that we want to see in young children around the world.
Thank you so much, everyone. I think this was a really rich panel. If I can ask all the panelists in the chat, if you can write when people can access the tool, what the timelines were. That's a question from some of our Q&A. But with that, I also put Richard Chivaka's question in the chat because I thought it was excellent and it would be great to hear from everyone about your experiences with it, because all of us have experiences. It's not just the panelists here. So thank you, everyone. So with that, we have 2 closing remarks. First, from the Executive Director of Early Childhood Development Action Network, Elizabeth Lule, and then from Haugen Yao from UNICEF, and he's the education specialist and economist in New York headquarters. So first, we'll start with Elizabeth, and then we'll go to Haugen. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Shikufe. What a wonderful panel. Big thank you to the panelists, Yelin, Abdullah, Emily, and Laura. And I really want to appreciate the spirit of partnership and the sharing between the partners. UNICEF, the World Bank, ILO, Brookings Institute, and want to appreciate the work that has been ongoing on supporting the communities of practice with countries together with UNICEF, but also establishing the gig that Emily talked about. And partnerships and coordination, I think, as we have seen on this work, on costing especially, is critical on harmonizing the language, harmonizing the methodologies, the definitions, transparency on data, but also being honest about what the challenges are as we roll out these various tools. And then also the lessons learned from when we apply these tools. What works, what doesn't work? What are the adjustments that need to be made as we work with countries, but also implementers and policymakers? I wanted to share that the issue of costing emerged as a very important ask and outcome from the recent Transforming Education Summit recently in New York, and also the UNGA discussions with governments. Because as we try and build the investment case, if we don't know how much it costs, if we don't know how much it costs to scale up, if we don't know how much it costs to improve quality, and as we heard the shocking numbers, that 70% of 10-year-olds in developing countries actually do not have the numeracy or the literacy, despite the billions that have been spent on universal education. So I think this work is very important. I love the idea of building the movement that Emily talked about, because there is a lot to do, and there are probably many more other tools that we don't know about, but perhaps as we gather many more people, we can harmonize, we can coordinate, and have the evidence that we need to make a much more stronger case, investment case, and improve the efficiency of the funds that we currently have. So with that, a million thanks to everybody and to the participants, and the work continues. Let's build the movement. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And now to close out, Haugen Yao, over to you, please. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Shikufe. I realize that I have 2 minutes, so I'll be short, but also bear with me that I may be speaking slowly because I'm still tested positive today with COVID. So in the past 1.5 hours, I would say that I've been listening, learning, and reflecting a lot, not only as UNICEF staff, but also as a parent, a father, because sometimes you have a better understanding of the cost when you really are paying out of your own pocket, right? I just want to add, just want to emphasize one point that it is critical to have all the costing tools in ECD being flexible and participatory. We know that ECD is affecting so many things, but also affected by so many other things. Therefore, it's great. It's great that today I see all the costing tools presented by colleagues are trying to tackle the complexity of ECD, but also maintain a certain level of simplicity in terms of understanding usage and adaptation. Yeah. And when I'm talking about being flexible and participatory, that also include the fact that maybe we should try to make our costing tool compatible to the existing costing tool in other education levels, and even to other sectors such as health and nutrition, or to other critical social topics such as employment. And Laura would agree, not just the employment of new personnel into the ECD industry, but also the opportunity cost, or to release the potential of the young mothers who would otherwise not be able to engage in the labor market. So EC is really touching on many things in our daily life. And it's really great to see that all the costing tool presented here are being piloted either at macro or micro level already in countries. That's really awesome. Elizabeth already mentioned that there was this Transforming Education Summit earlier this month. And we know that transforming education should start early, and costing should start even earlier. So to enable better planning, implementation, and more constructive, more rigorous evaluation in the future. So I really appreciate a big thank you and a big congratulations to ECDAN for organizing this very timely webinar. And you know what, maybe next year we can have another webinar to have the panel and the audience to share their own experience of usage and lesson learned. That would be fascinating. I will stop here. Back to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And with that, I think the call to action, the importance of costing, let's keep this alive. Please join Geek. Please go to all the links. We'll send out the recording. We'll close the webinar, and the panelists, if you can just stay on for a few minutes behind the scenes chit chat. That's our tradition for ECDAN webinars, where everyone can see behind the curtains. But I'll close the webinar for now. So thank